One guy offered to pay off his country's entire $10 billion national debt just to avoid prosecution. The other guy went to war with a chicken man. That's basically what happens every time someone puts Walter White next to Pablo Escobar. They look similar on the surface: drugs, danger, power. But the moment you zoom in, the gap becomes insane. But to really understand how far apart they are, you need to see what each man built and what it cost them. Today, we're breaking down why Walter White versus Pablo Escobar isn't even close.
Les quiero mandar un mensaje.
Pablo Escobar wasn't just a drug trafficker. Operating out of Medellin, Colombia during the 70s and 80s, he controlled roughly 80% of the global cocaine market at his peak. The Medellin cartel wasn't a drug operation. It was a parallel government with its own army, intelligence network, and political influence that reached the highest levels of Colombian society. What made Pablo truly terrifying wasn't just his wealth, estimated at over $30 billion at his peak, but his willingness to use extreme violence to protect his empire. His philosophy was simple and brutal.
Plata o plomo.
In other words, money or bullets. Accept the bribe or take the bullet, and he wasn't bluffing. This dude was responsible for the deaths of over 3,000 people, including politicians, judges, journalists, police officers, and innocent civilians. Did you know he bombed a commercial airliner, killing 107 people just to eliminate one potential witness? He even declared war on the Colombian government itself. And for a time, he was winning. His organization employed thousands of people, from street dealers to hitmen to chemists to politicians, on his payroll. He had entire neighborhoods loyal to him because he built soccer fields, housing, and provided money to the poor. Pablo was a man for the people. He understood that power wasn't just about fear. It was about loyalty, infrastructure, and being 10 steps ahead of everyone else. Now let's talk about Walter White. Yes, he's a brilliant chemist. Yes, he cooked the purest meth anyone had ever seen. And yes, he managed to build a decent operation in the Southwest, which is quite impressive from a high school teacher. But in the end, his ego took over, and it all came crashing down. Walter's entire empire lasted, 2 years? Pablo's cartel dominated for over a decade. Walter cooked in an RV and then in a super lab. Pablo had multiple labs, planes, and a distribution network that reached several countries. Walter thought he was untouchable when he had a few million in storage. It was estimated that Pablo was making $420 million per week at his height, and literally had to spend $2,500 a month on rubber bands just to hold his cash together. So let's address the elephant in the room: intelligence. Yes, Walter is arguably smarter than Pablo in terms of pure chemistry knowledge. His product was 99.1% pure, a masterpiece. But here's the thing: being a genius chemist doesn't make you a genius criminal. Walter made catastrophic mistakes constantly because he let his ego control his decisions. Remember when Walter left Gail's book in the bathroom where Hank could find it? That one moment of arrogance nearly destroyed everything. Or how about the time he indirectly told Hank he was Heisenberg, which, in my opinion, was because he couldn't stand the idea of Hank thinking Gail was the mastermind. That's not intelligence. That's choosing ego over survival instinct. Pablo, on the other hand, built an empire on calculated brutality and strategic thinking. He didn't need a PhD. He had something far more valuable in the drug world. He understood human nature, power dynamics, and how to build a loyal organization. He knew when to bribe, when to kill, when to hide, and when to go to war. That's a different kind of intelligence. And in the crime underworld, it's far more valuable than knowing molecular structures. Now let's imagine a scenario where Walter somehow ended up on Pablo's radar. Maybe Walter tried to expand into cocaine, or maybe his meth started cutting into cartel profits. Either way, the moment Pablo Escobar decided Walter White was a problem, it would be over in days, if not hours. Walter barely survived Gus. Pablo had a network of sicarios, professional killers who were loyal, well-trained, and absolutely ruthless. They weren't meth-head street dealers like the ones Walter occasionally dealt with. These were men who killed for a living and were good at it. Pablo could make a single phone call and have Walter, his entire family, and everyone he ever worked with eliminated before breakfast. Think about how Walter handled threats. If Gus really wanted Walter dead, he probably would be dead. That's what got Walt to his last resort of placing a bomb in a nursing home, which, to be fair, was a smart move, but desperate. When the neo-Nazis threatened him, he ended up losing everything. and living in a frozen cabin in New Hampshire. Walter's survival often came down to desperate last-minute gambits and a whole lot of luck. Pablo, on the other hand, survived assassination attempts from rival cartels, the Colombian military, special forces, and the DEA simultaneously for years. He had safe houses through Colombia, corruption at every level of government, and an intelligence network that kept him informed of every move his enemies made. When they came for him, he knew they were coming. Let's flip the scenario. Put Walter in 1980s Colombia trying to compete with Pablo. How long does he last? A week? A month if he's really careful? Walter's entire operation depended on a relatively stable American infrastructure, police you could sometimes avoid, a justice system with rules, and a criminal underworld that had some boundaries. In Pablo's Colombia, there were no rules. Judges who didn't cooperate were murdered along with their families. Police stations were bombed. Entire city blocks were leveled if Pablo decided it served his interests. Walter, who panicked when Hank started getting close to the truth, would be completely overwhelmed in an environment where violence was the default answer to every problem. But here's the crucial difference in their operations. Walter needed partners. He needed Jesse. He needed Mike. He needed Gus's distribution network. He needed Saul's connections. And every single one of those partnerships eventually fell apart because Walter couldn't stop manipulating, betraying, or underestimating the people around him. Pablo built an organization where loyalty was enforced through a combination of generosity and fear. His men didn't betray him because they knew Pablo would kill them and their families, but also because Pablo made them rich, gave them power. He understood that you build an empire by making people depend on you, not by constantly scheming against your own partners like Walter did. Even Walter's signature advantage, his chemistry skills, wouldn't mean much in a confrontation with Pablo. Walter's 99.1% pure meth was a marvel of chemistry. Pablo's 80% pure cocaine built an empire. That's the difference between perfection and domination. Now let's be honest. If Pablo really wanted chemists, he would hire them. He had the money to employ the best talent in the world. Walter's blue meth was unique, but uniqueness doesn't matter if you're dead. Pablo would either force Walter to work for him, or more likely just eliminate him and hire someone else who could cook something good enough. Let's talk about their downfalls, because that's revealing too. Walter's empire collapsed because of his pride, his need to be recognized as Heisenberg.
Say my name.
And his inability to just walk away when he had the chance. He had multiple opportunities to retire with millions of dollars, disappear with his family, and live comfortably for the rest of his life, but his ego wouldn't let him. Pablo's downfall came after years of sustained pressure from multiple governments, betrayal from former allies, and a manhunt that involved thousands of people. Even then, he didn't go quietly. The fact that it took that much firepower, resources, and time to bring down Pablo Escobar shows you the difference in scale between these two men. There's also the question of ruthlessness. Walter thought he was ruthless. He poisoned a child. He ordered hits. He watched Jesse's girlfriend choke to death. But Walter always hesitated. He always needed to justify his actions to himself. He needed to believe he was doing it for his family, that he was the good guy forced into bad situations.
Why did you make these decisions?
For the good of my family?
Pablo had no such illusions. He knew exactly what he was, and he didn't care. When a problem needed to be eliminated, it was eliminated immediately, without any moral justification. That decisiveness is what kept him alive and in power for so long. Walter's constant internal struggle made him unpredictable and emotional, and that is a very dangerous trait for someone trying to run a criminal empire. Now, some of you might argue that Walter had some impressive moments. The train heist was brilliant. Poisoning Brock and manipulating Jesse was diabolical. Killing Gus with a bomb was creative. And using the remote-controlled machine gun to take out the neo-Nazis showed that he could think tactically. But here's the thing. Those were all desperate moves by a man who was constantly backed into corners of his own making. Pablo operated from a position of strength. He didn't need to come up with clever schemes because he had the resources to simply overwhelm his enemies with money, firepower, and political influence. When Pablo wanted someone dead, they died. When he wanted to make a statement, he bombed a building. When he wanted to negotiate, the government came to him because they knew the alternative was more bloodshed. Pablo operated from power. Walter operated from desperation disguised as cleverness. Let's also consider their organization's sustainability. The Medellin cartel continued operating even after Pablo's death. Other cartels rose to take his place, but the infrastructure he built, the routes he established, and the corruption he planted all remained. Pablo built something that kept running even after he was gone. Walter's operation? It died the same day he did. Actually, it died before he did. By the time Walter used that machine gun, his empire was already gone. His money was taken, his partners were dead or scattered, and his reputation was destroyed. There was nothing left except one man's final desperate act of revenge. And that really gets to the heart of why this comparison isn't even close. Pablo Escobar built an empire. Walter White built a house of cards that collapsed the moment somebody looked at it too hard. In direct confrontation, Pablo didn't even need to get his hands dirty. He makes one phone call and his sicarios handle it. Walter is found dead in his car, or his house explodes, or he simply disappears one day and nobody ever finds the body. That's how Pablo handled threats, efficiently, brutally, and permanently. The only scenario where Walter survives is if he immediately surrenders, agrees to work for Pablo, and keeps his head down. But we all know Walter's ego won't even allow him. He'd try to outmaneuver Pablo, just like he tried with Gus, and he'd end up dead even faster because Pablo doesn't play games or give second chances. So here's the bottom line. Walter White was a small-time meth cook who got lucky for a while before his luck ran out. Pablo Escobar was a genuine drug lord who built one of the most powerful criminal organizations in history, and whose legacy still echoes through Colombia today. Walter thought he was a kingpin when he had a few $1 million and controlled meth distribution in the Southwest. Pablo was moving billions of dollars of cocaine globally and had entire government departments on his payroll. The scale isn't even comparable. In terms of chemistry knowledge, Walter wins. In terms of being a chemistry teacher, Walter wins. But in terms of being a drug lord, a criminal mastermind, a tactical genius, a ruthless operator, and someone who could actually build and maintain a lasting criminal empire, Pablo Escobar absolutely destroys Walter White in every category that matters. This wouldn't be a fight. It wouldn't even be close. Do you think Walter would have lasted any longer in Pablo's world? Could his chemistry genius have saved him from a cartel hit squad? Tell me in the comments section. And remember to like if you enjoyed today's video. If you think I'm wrong and Walter would somehow survive, let me know how. I'm genuinely curious to hear the arguments.